I turned 35 the same way I turned every other age in my family, quietly, politely, and apparently with a target taped to my back. People like to talk about birthday surprises as if they're charming. Mine usually involve my sister finding new ways to remind me that I grew up as the family afterthought. This year, she went for the gold medal. 3 months had passed since my father died, and when I say, my father, I mean Colonel Robert Lawson, the man who raised me, paid for my braces, taught me how to change a tire, and yelled at me for leaving dishes in the sink, the man who loved structure so much he ironed his socks. Losing him hit me harder than any deployment I'd ever been through, and I've done my share of waking up in parts of the world where the best-case scenario was nobody shooting at me before breakfast. My mother, Deborah, suggested a small birthday dinner at home, delivered in the same flat tone she used when the dentist told her she needed a root canal. Nobody in my family has ever put emotional effort into making me feel celebrated, so I didn't expect much. Maybe a cake from the grocery store, maybe 2 minutes of eye contact. I wasn't greedy. The moment I walked into the house, I felt the shift. My sister, Madison, was already performing for an audience that wasn't even there. She leaned back in her chair like she was posing for a stock photo titled, "Smug Woman Enjoying Chaos." Mom fluttered around the kitchen with that tight smile she uses when she knows something's wrong but refuses to admit it. "Look who finally made it," Madison said, not bothering to hide the tone she uses with telemarketers. "Happy birthday, Captain." She always hits that last word like she's reminding everyone in the room I serve in the military, and she doesn't like the bragging rights it gives me. I set the bottle of wine I brought on the counter. Neutral civilian gesture. Nothing aggressive. No sudden movements. You learn that growing up in a house where your presence can annoy people just by existing. Dinner was the usual routine. Madison talked about herself like she was being paid per sentence, her new clients, her remodeled kitchen, her plans to maybe get a second dog if the vibe feels right. Mom nodded along with the kind of enthusiasm she never applied to anything I've ever done, including the time I received a medal that came with a handshake from someone with a parking space labeled General. I tried to steer the conversation somewhere normal. "How's the house sale going?" "Did the realtor?" Madison cut me off. "Oh my God, Hannah, can we not talk about depressing stuff? It's your birthday." She said it like she was offended on my behalf. I didn't bother responding. Years of army training teaches you when to pick your battles. This one wasn't worth the paperwork. After we ate, Madison got that look. The look she gets right before she launches a grenade, just to see where the pieces land. She reached for a box wrapped in silver paper and slid it across the table toward me. "Go on," she said. "Open it." Mom stared at her wine glass like she was trying to drink her way through it. I should have known. I absolutely should have known. But the part of me that still hoped for a real moment with my family, the part I keep trying to kill, wanted to believe it might be something thoughtful for once. It wasn't. Inside the box was a DNA test kit, one of those mail-in ones that promise to tell you who your ancestors were, as if anyone actually needs scientific proof that their great-great-grandmother probably lived through something unpleasant. "What is this?" I asked, even though the answer was obvious. Madison smirked like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "It's just a joke. Relax. Maybe it'll finally explain why you've always been another man's mistake in this family." She said it lightly, casually, like she was commenting on the weather. But she hit the line exactly right, like she'd waited years to deliver it. Mom winced. Not because she disagreed, oh no. That would require a backbone, but because Madison said the quiet part out loud. I sat there, holding the box. I didn't say anything. Years of intelligence work teaches you how to keep your face still even when someone has just punched you in the gut with a sentence. Madison laughed, satisfied with the effect. "Fun, right? Nothing screams funny birthday prank like implying someone doesn't belong in the only family they've ever known." I left the house right after dessert. No dramatic exit, no yelling. Just walked out the door, box in hand, because walking away is sometimes the only dignified move you've got when the people who should love you the most treat you like a piece of lost property. Driving back to base, I kept replaying the moment in my head. I've stood in briefing rooms with generals, interrogated people who were definitely lying to me, and handled classified information that could ruin someone's career with one misplaced sentence. Yet nothing prepared me for the quiet kind of cruelty Madison specializes in. When I got home, I tossed the box onto my kitchen table. The test sat there like it was daring me to pick it up. I didn't want to care. I really didn't. But the thing about being raised in a family that treats you like an outsider is that you eventually start wondering if maybe they know something you don't. I stared at that box for longer than I'd ever admit. And then I made a decision I didn't plan to make when the night started. I picked it up, opened the instructions, and swabbed my cheek. Not because Madison wanted me to. Because I was done letting her define the story. And if there was even a possibility that something about my life wasn't what I'd been told, I wanted to know the truth on my terms, not hers. I sealed the sample, filled out the forms, and dropped it in the mail the next morning before work. No drama, no hesitation, no going back. At that point, I had no idea the test she meant as a joke would become the first domino in the kind of disaster even my military training couldn't have prepared me for. And I definitely didn't know that one smart-lipped comment at a birthday dinner was about to drag my entire family into something they were not prepared to face. But the thing about the truth is simple. Once you start pulling the thread, you don't get to choose what unravels. The morning after I mailed the test, a tightness settled in my chest that didn't go away, the kind that tells you something is moving under the surface even if you can't see it yet. I tried to shake it off while heading into my office on base, but it stayed with me like a weight I couldn't shift. Work usually snaps me out of whatever personal mess is spinning in the background. The Army is good for that. Clear roles, clear expectations, no emotional guessing games. Families should take notes. I logged into my workstation, expecting the usual pile of reports waiting for review. Instead, a red notification blinked at the top of my screen, the kind that doesn't show up unless someone higher than you decides your day needs to get significantly worse. It was an internal message from DoD Consolidated Adjudications Facility, the office that oversees security clearances. It had one of those subject lines that hits you in the throat before you even open it. Flagged. Inconsistency in personnel background information. I stared at it long enough that my coffee went cold. Flags aren't casual. Flags aren't jokes. A flag means someone submitted information that contradicts your background file. A flag means someone is telling the government you might not be who you say you are. A flag means your entire career is now dangling by a string held by a stranger in an office somewhere. I opened the message. It wasn't long. Just a few bullet points and a request for a meeting. The part that stood out was this line. Anonymous submission regarding potential inaccuracies in familial records. There are moments when your brain puts things together before you're ready to accept the conclusion. My hands tightened on the mouse. Anonymous. Familial records. 1 week after Madison handed me a DNA kit like she was gifting me a dead squirrel wrapped in ribbon, it was almost impressive. My sister didn't just want to humiliate me at a birthday dinner. She wanted to throw a grenade into my career from the comfort of her living room. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the bland office ceiling, trying to keep my face neutral. The last thing I needed was someone walking by and asking why I looked like I was planning a coup. I'm an intelligence officer. People get jumpy when we look contemplative. A knock hit my doorway. Lieutenant Foster poked his head in. Ma'am, you good? You look like you've seen some things. I forced a half smile. That's because I have. He nodded, completely missing the subtext. Copy that. If you need anything, let me know. He left. And I kept replaying the message. A review meant my clearance could be suspended. If that happened, I'd be reassigned to administrative work at best and sidelined at worst. If the review uncovered anything that looked suspicious, intentional or not, my promotion packet for major would go straight into a shredder. A family joke shouldn't have the power to derail a military career, but here we were. Madison had always been petty, but this was strategic, methodical, calculated in a way that meant she'd spent time thinking about the best place to land a hit. I pulled up my calendar and scheduled the required meeting with the clearance officer. The soonest available slot was 3 days out. 3 days of stewing in uncertainty, trying to focus on intelligence briefs while my brain staged a mutiny. That evening, when I got home, I sat at my kitchen table again, staring at the empty space where the DNA kit had been. The room felt different now. heavier, like I'd accidentally opened a door I didn't know existed. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Madison handing me the box, smiling like she'd already rehearsed the fallout in her head. I saw my mother looking away, refusing to intervene. I saw my father, the man who'd raised me, wondering what he would say if he knew the military might question whether I belonged in the uniform I wore every day. The meeting with the clearance officer took place in a small, glass-walled conference room that tried too hard to look welcoming. The officer, a woman named Sharp, fittingly reviewed her notes with a neutral expression that gave away nothing. "We received an anonymous report suggesting discrepancies in your family background," she said. "We're required to follow up and verify." I nodded. "Understood. Has anything recently occurred that might have prompted someone to submit inaccurate information?" The question was polite. The meaning was not. I thought back to Madison's smirk, the way she delivered that line like it was a gift. Another man's mistake. "A family member made a comment that could have been misinterpreted," I said carefully. "There was a disagreement." Sharp wrote something down. "We'll need documentation confirming your parental background. Birth certificate, hospital records, anything relevant. We'll also run a corroboration check." Corroboration check. Translation: if the DNA test I mailed came back with surprises, the Army would know, and they would want explanations. Walking out of that meeting felt like leaving a courtroom. Nothing had been decided, but everything was in motion. Every step back to my office felt heavier, like someone had quietly added weight plates to my shoulders. 2 days later, the official packet arrived in my secure inbox. It listed the documents they needed and the deadline. Reasonable, standard, absolutely terrifying if the people who raised you can't be trusted to tell the truth about basic facts. I drove to my mother's house after work, hoping for answers. The lights were on. Madison's car wasn't there, which was the first good sign I'd had all week. Mom opened the door like she'd been waiting for something bad to happen. "Hannah, I wasn't expecting you. I need my birth documents," I said, stepping inside. No small talk, no warm-up. I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. She hesitated. "Your documents? Why?" "As close. The Army needs them. Security review." Her eyes widened just a fraction. Not surprise. Recognition. That was the moment I understood. She already knew what this was about. She led me to a drawer in the study and shuffled through a pile of folders. Her hands shook more than usual. For someone who prides herself on neatness, the drawer looked like a tornado had passed through. When she handed me the folder, she avoided my eyes. The papers inside were correct birth certificate, hospital record, but something was missing. The signature line from the attending physician looked smudged, almost rewritten. And tucked behind the certificate was something I hadn't expected to find. A photograph. The same kind of photo parents keep in albums, except this one was different. In it, I was a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, being held by a man who was absolutely not Colonel Lawson. He looked younger than my father ever had in the photos from that time, and he was staring at me like he knew something no one else did. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 2 words, "Forgive me." My throat tightened. The air suddenly felt thinner. "How long have you had this?" I asked. Mom sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping. "It was a mistake to keep it. I thought I had thrown it away years ago." She wasn't talking about the photo. She was talking about the man in it. The room felt small, like the walls were leaning in. All the tension from the past week suddenly made sense and no sense at all. I slipped the picture into the folder without saying anything more. I left the house the same way I had on my birthday. Quietly. Calmly. Because anything I said in that moment would come from a place I didn't want to visit. Back in my car, the only thought that cut through the noise was simple. If Madison wanted a war, she'd picked the wrong soldier. Holding that folder on the passenger seat while I drove back to base felt like driving around with a live device I wasn't trained to defuse. The photo pressed against the inside flap. Impossible to ignore, no matter how many times I told myself to focus on the road. The man holding me wasn't my father, and my mother's handwriting wasn't a mystery to solve. It was a confession wrapped in ink. I parked outside my apartment and sat there for a moment, letting the engine tick its way into silence. The building lights were steady, The parking lot was quiet, and everything around me looked exactly the same as it always did. The only difference was sitting in my lap in a thin paper folder that suddenly weighed more than my gear on deployment. The Army needed documents. They wanted clarity, verification, confirmation. I'd walked into plenty of intelligence briefings where someone said a line like, "The situation is fluid," but this was personal fluidity, the kind that gets under your skin and sits in your bones. I wasn't just trying to protect a clearance anymore. I was trying to figure out the foundation of my entire life. I took the photo out again, studying the man's face. Tall, dark hair, strong jaw, the kind of calm expression you see in people who think before they speak. Definitely not Colonel Lawson. That fact alone hit harder than anything Madison had said at dinner. Words are cheap. A photograph is evidence. The next morning, I went in early and closed myself in my office. If someone walked by, they'd assume I was buried in intel work, which technically wasn't wrong, just not the kind they thought. I scanned the photo and ran a basic search through public records. I didn't have access to anything classified for personal use, and I wasn't about to risk my career by trying. But you'd be amazed what you can find through legal, open sources when you know where to look. Nothing matched the face directly, but when I zoomed in on the background of the photo, I saw a faint hospital logo on the wall. It belonged to Street, Vincent Medical Center, and the design style matched the late 80s. So my mother hadn't lied about where I'd been born. She'd just left out who was standing in the room. For someone who spent her entire life preaching, honesty builds trust, she'd built our family on a foundation that should have cracked decades ago. During lunch, I stepped outside with my phone and called her. It rang twice before she picked up. "Hannah?" Her voice was thin, like she already knew I wasn't calling to chat about weather patterns. "I found the picture," I said. She inhaled sharply. Silence stretched out before she answered. "I shouldn't have kept it." "What does it mean?" "It means your father, Robert. He was a good man. He wanted what was best." That wasn't an answer. That was a dodge. I'd interrogated enough people to recognize verbal gymnastics when I heard it. "Who is he?" I asked. "Hannah, this isn't something—" "I'm not asking for drama. I'm asking for the truth." Another silence. Longer, heavier. It was before Robert and I fixed things. We were separated for a short time. It was complicated. Complicated. The favorite word of people who don't want to tell you the real story. "Did Madison know?" I asked. Mom hesitated just a fraction too long. She overheard something when she was a teenager. I didn't think she understood. She understood enough to use it as ammunition 2 decades later. "Did Dad know?" I forced the words out. "Yes," she whispered. "He found out when you were 2. He chose to raise you. He loved you, Hannah." My throat tightened. I believed her about that part. He'd never treated me like a burden. Cold sometimes, distant at others, but never resentful. But loving someone while hiding the truth from them are 2 different categories. "I have to go," I said, because there was nothing else to say that wouldn't shatter the small amount of control I was hanging on to. I ended the call and stared out at the base, watching soldiers move between buildings with purpose. Nobody out there was wondering who their father was. Nobody out there was balancing intel briefs with existential crises. They had missions, objectives, clear targets. I had a photograph. As I walked back toward the office, my phone buzzed with a message from Madison. Of course it did. People like her always sense when their target is wobbling. The message said, "Still mad about the birthday gift? You're overreacting." I stopped walking. My thumb hovered over the screen. Of all the responses bubbling up in my brain, only one made sense. "Why did you send something to the Army?" I typed. 3 dots appeared. She was typing. Then she stopped typing. Then started again. Finally, "No idea what you mean." A lie. A bad one. And not even a creative one. I didn't respond. If I did, it would tempt her to escalate. And the last thing I needed was a digital trail of sisterly warfare for clearance investigators to analyze. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Work came in. Reports needed reviewing. Soldiers dropped off files. People asked questions. Normal rhythm, except my head wasn't cooperating. Every few minutes, the image of that man in the photo flashed like a strobe light in my mind. That evening, I acknowledged something I'd been avoiding since the birthday dinner. I couldn't navigate this alone. Not with my career on the line, not with my family's history turning into a maze of secrets and selective storytelling. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and searched for an estate and military affairs attorney in the area. The name that came up repeatedly, with reviews describing her as unshakable, sharp, and not afraid to confront difficult family cases, was attorney Vanessa Moore. I booked an appointment. The next morning, I sat across from her in a calm office decorated with nothing fragile, which I appreciated. She listened while I explained the background, the DNA test, the investigation, the photo, the shifting expressions on my mother's face. She didn't interrupt. Attorneys with experience know when to let someone talk. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "This isn't random," she said. "Your sister isn't impulsive. This is organized. Intentional. Someone doesn't go from birthday jokes to clearance-triggering reports unless they want to put you in a vulnerable position." I nodded. "That's what it feels like." "Good," she said, surprising me. "Because that means you're not imagining it, and we can work with facts, not feelings." She took notes, asked for copies of the documents, asked for the timeline, asked if I was ready for the possibility that everything I knew about my upbringing had layers I hadn't discovered yet. I told her yes. It wasn't entirely true, but saying no wasn't an option. When I left her office, the air outside felt different. Not lighter, but steadier, the way it feels before a storm organizes itself. I knew now that whatever was happening inside, my family had been building for years, maybe decades, long before a DNA kit showed up on my dinner plate disguised as a birthday present. And standing outside that attorney's office, holding paperwork that outlined the first steps of the investigation we were building, I realized the truth had already started pulling at the loose threads whether I wanted it to or not. Walking out of Vanessa's office with a plan in motion steadied me just enough to get through the next few days, though my mind kept drifting back to the sealed DNA test, still somewhere in the processing pipeline. I didn't know when the results would show up, but I could feel them getting closer, like the hum of a machine you can hear before you see it. By the time the 5th week hit, I'd convinced myself I was ready for whatever the lab sent me. That confidence lasted exactly 30 seconds. I was in the middle of reviewing a report when the email notification popped up. The subject line was friendly in the way only automated messages can be. "Your DNA results are ready." No fanfare, no warning label, nothing to prepare me for the fact that this wasn't entertainment or genealogy curiosity. This was about my life. I clicked the link, logged in, and waited for the page to load. My heart wasn't racing, but everything inside me felt oddly still, like my body was bracing for impact. The first line of the summary wasn't long. It didn't need to be. No biological relationship detected with parental markers listed in your profile. There's no dramatic soundtrack in real life. No swell of music to underline the moment your world tilts. Just a white screen full of medical terminology and a tightness in your chest that doesn't announce its intentions. I exhaled slowly and scrolled. The system had matched me with several distant relatives, the kind of third and fourth cousins who love sending friend requests to strangers. But near the top was a name highlighted in bold. Possible, close, paternal match. Marshall family line. The details below listed a cluster of genetic connections pointing toward one man, Ethan Marshall. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the name. I'd read enough about him during my early searches to know the basics. Former Army officer. Later became a real estate investor. Died 5 years ago. No immediate family. Successful, respected, not the type of guy people whisper scandals about at dinner parties. A man who lived the kind of life my father respected. A man who had apparently held me when I was an infant. It wasn't confirmation from a court or a lawyer, but genetically, biologically? The science was already done. A soft knock hit my doorframe. Foster peeked in again. "Ma'am, you got that look like someone told you Chow Hall ran out of coffee." "Just reading something surprising," I said. "Good surprise or bad surprise?" I shrugged, still deciding. He nodded like that was a normal answer and walked off, leaving me alone with the question I hadn't dared ask out loud. What did this change? The results didn't rewrite my childhood. It didn't erase Colonel Lawson teaching me how to drive in an empty parking lot or grilling burgers while pretending he wasn't watching me climb the oak tree in the backyard. But it reframed everything around the edges, every awkward silence, every argument between my parents when they thought I was asleep. Every time my mother looked at me like she wanted to say something and couldn't. And it explained Madison. Not her cruelty, she'd perfected that on her own, but the satisfaction she'd gotten from handing me that kit. She already knew the truth. She'd known for years. This wasn't just a joke, it was an unveiling she assumed would knock me flat. I shut my laptop and walked outside, needing air that didn't smell like printer toner and recycled HVAC. The base was busy, soldiers moving with purpose, trucks kicking up dust, radios buzzing, normal operations, predictable patterns, a world with rules. I'd built my entire career on structure, because my family never had any. My phone buzzed. A new text from Madison. Feeling better yet? Maybe the results will tell you something fun. I didn't respond. Not because I was avoiding her, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't need anything from her. Not validation, not explanation, not even her silence. The truth existed without her permission. When my shift ended, I went home, changed into running clothes, and hit the trail behind my building. I wasn't running to clear my head. I was running because movement gave my thoughts somewhere to go besides the part of my brain that wanted to unravel. And somewhere between mile 2 and 3, a clarity settled in. The military review wasn't the real threat. The DNA results weren't the threat either. The threat was the gap between what my family wanted me to believe and what was actually true. And for the first time, the truth was on my side. After I showered, I sat at my kitchen table again, opened the DNA report, and took screenshots of everything relevant. I organized the files neatly, labeled them for the clearance investigation and for Vanessa. I kept my movements calm and methodical. Not because I wasn't shaken, but because action kept panic at a distance. Then I opened the family group chat. I looked at the blinking cursor for a moment before typing the simplest message possible. A picture of the report's header and the question, "Anyone want to explain this?" It took less than a minute for Mom to call. Her voice cracked before she even said hello. "Hannah, please, can we talk about this privately? You don't understand everything that happened back then." "I'm willing to understand," I said, "but I won't pretend nothing happened." I was did-tick. She started to ramble, apologizing without actually apologizing, describing everything as complicated, which was becoming her favorite defense. She never once said she was sorry for lying. She never once acknowledged what I was dealing with in the military. She kept trying to protect the version of the story where she didn't have to admit she'd let the truth rot under the floorboards. While Mom talked herself in circles, another message appeared in the group chat from Madison. "Well, now you know, nothing else. Not shock. Not regret. Just confirmation that she'd been waiting for this moment like it was the season finale of her favorite show." Mom was still talking when I hung up. Not out of cruelty, but because her explanations weren't explanations at all. There is a tone people use when they want forgiveness without accountability, and she'd mastered it. I set my phone down and looked at the DNA report another time, but the emotional sting had dulled into something sharper, steadier. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. If Madison had planned this as a way to ruin my footing, she'd failed. She gave me the truth. And in my world, truth is leverage. I emailed the full set of documents to Vanessa and added a short note. Results arrived. This changes the scope of everything. Let's move forward. Her reply came half an hour later. Understood. I'm expanding the investigation. You'll want to see what we're uncovering next. I sat back in my chair, letting the quiet settle over the room. The lights from the kitchen cast a soft glow across the table, catching the edges of the photograph, lying next to my laptop, the man holding me, looking at me with a certainty that my family had never offered. The DNA results didn't break anything. They clarified it. And whatever came next would move in the direction of truth. Because the part of my life built on assumptions had already crumbled. Forwarding the DNA results to Vanessa set everything into motion faster than I expected, and the shift was immediate. Instead of circling around questions I couldn't answer, we finally had a foundation to build on. The next morning, Vanessa asked me to meet her at her office so we could map out the next steps. And walking in felt less like visiting a lawyer and more like stepping into the operations room before a mission brief. She had documents laid out, a legal pad full of highlighted notes, and a look that said she had already begun pulling threads that someone really didn't want pulled. "Your DNA results don't just confirm a family secret," she said, gesturing to the papers. "They change the legal landscape, especially regarding inheritance." I took a seat across from her. "Meaning what?" "It's no injury mine. Meaning your father's estate has to be handled according to his will, not according to whatever story your sister thought she could manipulate. If he knew you weren't his biological daughter and still named you a beneficiary, that's ironclad. If your sister has been planning to contest it, we'll catch her paper trail." Madison planning to contest something wasn't exactly breaking news, but the fact that Vanessa already expected documentation made something tighten in my chest. Growing up with my sister was like living with someone who believed rules were suggestions and consequences were myths. If she'd been scheming long before my father died, it wouldn't surprise me. Vanessa tapped a folder. "My investigator Newman started looking into your sister's financial activity. You might want to brace yourself." Bracing myself was basically my full-time hobby at this point. "Go ahead." She slid several pages toward me: bank statements, transaction logs, annotated timelines. "There were multiple withdrawals from your father's account while he was in hospice care. Significant amounts. No documented permission." I scanned the pages. $60,000? Correct. Pulled over a 2-month period. She used his debit card and online transfers. I checked your father was heavily medicated at the time. So she stole from him. In polite legal language? Yes. I'm in no breast. I kept flipping through the pages. Each line of numbers felt like another punch. I wasn't surprised Madison would take advantage of a situation that protected her. But doing it while our father was dying added a level of coldness I hadn't been prepared for. You don't expect your own sibling to skim cash from your dying parent like it's a clearance sale. "That's not all," Vanessa added. "We also found emails." She slid over printed copies. The first was from Madison to a well-known estate litigation attorney. The timestamp put it at 6 months before Colonel Lawson passed away. The subject line read, "Potential modification to existing will." My breath stalled for a moment. She was trying to change the will while he was still alive? She was trying to find out if she could pressure him into it. She didn't have legal standing, so none of this went anywhere, but the intention is clear. I kept reading. The tone of the email was unmistakable. Madison claimed she was concerned about fairness and wanted to ensure proper distribution. In Madison speak, that translated to, "I should get everything, and I want someone to tell me how to make that happen." Vanessa tapped the next page. "There's also this." It was a receipt. A shipping confirmation for a DNA test kit. Ordered from Madison's address. Delivered 3 weeks before my birthday. "Interesting timing," Vanessa said, her voice dry. So it wasn't just a mean-spirited birthday stunt. She'd planned it, ordered it, gift-wrapped it, and she'd timed it right before the anonymous tip landed on the Army's desk. "She sent the anonymous report," I said. "Almost certainly," Vanessa replied. "And if she submitted false information about a military officer's background, that's a serious offense. We'll keep that in our back pocket." I'd handled foreign intelligence threats, interviewed soldiers, and sorted through enough classified reports to know calculated behavior when I saw it. Madison hadn't just tried to embarrass me, she'd tried to destabilize everything she thought defined my life. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We keep tracking the pattern," she said. "People who manipulate estates usually leave crumbs. They get arrogant, impatient, lose discipline, and if she's been holding leverage over your mother for years, there will be signs." I nodded, grateful for Vanessa's calm approach. My military brain appreciated strategy. "Objectives. Steps. What do you need from me?" I asked. "Anything you remember about your family dynamic, especially moments where your sister acted like she had power she shouldn't have. Times your mother caved to her for no reason. Times you were treated differently for reasons that didn't make sense." That was a longer list than I liked. I described the favoritism. The way my mother never said no to Madison even when she should have. The times I overheard arguments between my parents about circumstances and mistakes. The sudden financial gifts Madison received without explanation, the way my mother always seemed terrified of Madison's anger. Vanessa listened, scribbling notes with the same focus I used during Intel debriefings. Patterns like this don't happen in a vacuum, she said. Someone knew something. Someone used something. We'll find it. It's .sharer 1 I Liggett. When I left her office, the investigator, Newman, was just arriving. He looked like the type of guy who never missed a detail, and also never paid extra for guacamole. Conservative haircut, calm demeanor, eyes that scanned everything. I gave him a polite nod as we passed. That night, I tried to work out, thinking it would quiet my mind. It didn't. The treadmill couldn't burn through the realization that Madison had been planning an inheritance play while our father was dying. You expect that kind of behavior from distant relatives in movies, not from the person you used to share a bathroom with. Around 10, my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. Newman found something. You'll want to see this in the morning. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of that one sentence settle over me. I didn't want to speculate, but experience had taught me people rarely say, "You'll want to see this," when the news is warm and fuzzy. I went to bed early, though sleep wasn't much more than a series of short naps interrupted by flashes of paperwork, Madison's smirk, and my mother's handwriting on the back of that photograph. At sunrise, I headed straight to Vanessa's office. She and Newman were already seated, a thick stack of documents between them. Newman slid a folder toward me. "Your sister's been busy," he said. The first page showed a meeting log. Madison had met not one but 3 different estate litigation attorneys in the past year. None of the meetings would have been illegal, but all of them took place before my father got sick. Before, not after. That detail said more than any confession could. "She's been preparing for a scenario where she maximizes her share," Newman explained. "She was shopping for strategies." The next document was worse. It was a transcript from a conversation between Madison and a family friend. The friend had been casually interviewed by Newman, and apparently she talked faster than she thought. The transcript included this line from Madison. "Things are going to change soon. I just have to make sure the right person gets what they deserve." The right person. Meaning her. Newman moved to the next item. A recorded voicemail from Madison to my mother. Angry, sharp, threatening in the way people get when they think they're untouchable. "You owe me," she said in the recording. "Don't forget I kept your secret for 20 years. I looked at Vanessa, who met my eyes with a steady, knowing expression. "So that's what this is," I said. "Leverage." "And now," Vanessa replied, "it's evidence." End quote. I closed the folder and set my hands on it, the weight of everything aligning into something clear enough to grasp. Madison hadn't just attacked me out of spite. She'd built a plan. A strategy, a long-term campaign to rewrite the family hierarchy in her favor. And somewhere along the line, she decided taking out her sister was a reasonable part of the plan. Sitting there with the evidence laid out in front of me, I didn't feel broken or betrayed or shaken the way Madison had probably hoped. What I felt was focus. Clean, sharp focus. If she wanted to play chess, she should have chosen someone who didn't work in intelligence for a living. Walking into the personnel building for my clearance review felt different this time, not because the room had changed, but because I had. The truth sitting under everything finally had a name, a face, and a paper trail, and knowing that gave me a steadiness I'd been missing since the birthday dinner. I still didn't know how deeply Madison had reached into my life, but at least I understood the scope of her intent. That made the review feel less like a firing squad, and more like another obstacle in a system I'd spent my career navigating. The receptionist waved me through with the same polite neutrality she used for everyone, and I appreciated that. The last thing I wanted was sympathy. Sympathy has a way of making things worse. The waiting room was quiet, fluorescent lit, and just cold enough to keep people alert. Classic military efficiency. When my name was called, I walked into a small conference room where Officer Sharp, the same woman from my preliminary meeting, sat with a thin folder in front of her. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable, and her tone as neutral as it gets. She could have been announcing lunch schedules. "Captain Lawson," she said, "have a seat." I sat. She opened the folder, glanced at the documents, and folded her hands. "We're following up on the anonymous submission regarding discrepancies in your family records. You've provided birth documents, medical records, and supplemental information. Thank you for that. Of course, I said. She nodded once. Before we complete the review, I need to ask you a few final questions for verification. Go ahead. Have you ever knowingly withheld information about your parentage or family background from the Army? No. Did you have any knowledge prior to the anonymous submission that your biological relationship to the Lawsons might be in question? No. Have you had any contact with individuals who might be considered foreign influence or whose involvement would compromise your security standing? No. I was. Do you have any reason to believe the anonymous submission was made in good faith? I paused for half a second, not because I hesitated, but because choosing the right words mattered. No, I said. I believe it was submitted with malicious intent. Sharp wrote something down. Any evidence to support that belief? I provided communication patterns and personal history that indicate ongoing family conflict. I have legal representation handling additional documentation. She nodded again, not out of sympathy, but because she had the information she needed. Sharp was the type who didn't care about the drama behind an answer, only whether it held weight. She turned the folder around, scanning the last page. Captain Lawson, based on the documentation we've reviewed, the interviews conducted, and the corroboration checks completed, we have found no inconsistencies that would compromise your clearance. Your status will be maintained in full. You'll receive formal notification within 24 hours. The relief didn't hit like a wave. It landed more quietly, like loosening a belt a notch after wearing it too tight. Not dramatic. Just necessary. Thank you, I said. This review will be marked as resolved. Should any future information arise, you'll be contacted. I nodded, stood, and shook her hand. The meeting ended as cleanly as it began. No theatrics, no emotional commentary. Exactly how the military prefers to operate. As I stepped out of the building, the sunlight felt sharper, the air cooler. Maybe it was just adrenaline tapering off, but the base looked different, clearer somehow, like it wasn't something I needed to defend myself from anymore. I'd gotten through the part that could have ended everything I'd built. Now the only threats left were the ones outside the installation fence. I started walking toward my car, and my phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. How'd it go? She asked, as soon as I answered. My clearance is intact, I said. They ruled the report malicious. Good. That eliminates one angle your sister could have used against you. She really thought this would knock me out of the running. People who manipulate inheritance assume careers can be toppled as easily as wills, Vanessa said. They underestimate systems with structure. That made me laugh under my breath. The Army does love structure. That's why I knew the report wouldn't stick. You've got a spotless record, no misconduct, no suspicious associations, no reason for the Army to think twice. Meanwhile, the person who sent it left fingerprints all over their actions, she finished. She paused for a moment. Now that the review is done, we'll shift our focus entirely to the estate. Newman found more documents. Some of it connects directly to your father's legal instructions. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and leaned back. Anything I need to act on right now? No, not yet, she said. Just stay reachable. The will reading is scheduled for next week. I knew that part already, but hearing it from her had a different weight to it. A legal meeting about your father's last decisions isn't something you prepare for emotionally, especially when your family is already on fire. After the call, I sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. The bass hummed around me, vehicles passing, distant commands, the rhythmic clatter of boots on pavement, familiar sounds that didn't demand anything from me except awareness. My phone lit up again, a new message from Madison. Security review must have been fun. Hope you're not too stressed. The amount of restraint it took not to throw my phone across the parking lot could have earned me another medal. Her timing was always perfect in the worst way. If she knew the review hadn't gone the way she wanted, she didn't show it. But something in the tone, too casual, too confident, made it clear she thought she still had the upper hand. I didn't respond. For the rest of the day, I kept my focus on work, but my thoughts drifted back to the documents Newman uncovered. The financial theft, the lawyer consultations, the threatening voicemail, and now, the confirmation that my father had known the truth that my mother had spent decades avoiding. By the time I got home, The sky had faded into evening colors, and I felt the exhaustion settle in, not physical, but the kind that comes from operating at high alert for too long. I heated leftovers, ate without really tasting them, and opened the windows to let fresh air in. I pulled the DNA report back up on my laptop, not because I needed to reread it, but because looking at the facts helped ground me. The truth wasn't shifting. It wasn't emotional. It was static, consistent, unchangeable. That stability mattered more than I expected. Later, while sorting through emails, I came across one from the Army's career management system confirming my promotion packet was still active and unchanged. That was the final piece I needed to shake off the remaining tension. My career hadn't cracked, my record hadn't suffered, and the attempt to weaponize my background had fallen flat. All that remained now was the part Madison cared about most, the reading of our father's will. The thought didn't hit like dread or anticipation. It landed more like a checkpoint, something to walk through, not tiptoe around. The truth was no longer something I feared bumping into. It was something I could use, and knowing that changed the way the entire situation sat in my mind. The house was quiet as I moved around the kitchen, rinsing dishes, wiping counters, letting muscle memory take over. Outside, traffic hummed softly in the distance. Inside, the only sound was the steady pace of my own breathing and the sense that, for the first time in weeks, something had shifted back into my control. Nothing felt finished or resolved. It just felt like the ground had stopped tilting, and that was enough. Driving to the law office the morning of the will reading felt strangely calm, almost too calm, like the silence right before a briefing starts, and everyone pretends they aren't mentally preparing for whatever mess is about to be unveiled. I parked, straightened my uniform out of habit even though I wasn't wearing one, and walked toward the building with the folder Vanessa told me to bring. She said it wouldn't be necessary, but having it in my hand felt like walking in with armor. Not emotional armor, I gave up on that decades ago, but the kind made out of paper, signatures, timestamps, and legal consequences. Vanessa arrived at the same time I did, stepping out of her car with the expression of someone who enjoys a good challenge and wasn't shy about admitting it. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as anyone whose family might implode in a conference room," I said. "That's the spirit." We headed inside. Gregory Hunt's office was on the top floor, the kind of place with polished wood panels, quiet hallways, and enough expensive furniture to remind you that every hour spent here would cost more than anyone wanted to think about. A receptionist guided us to a large conference room with a long table that could easily seat 12. It only needed 4 today, which somehow made the room feel even bigger. My mother was already there, sitting near one end of the table, hands clasped tight. She didn't look at me when we walked in. Madison wasn't there yet, which wasn't surprising. She liked making an entrance. I took a seat next to Vanessa. She gave me a small nod, a silent reassurance that we were exactly where we needed to be. A few minutes later, the door swung open, and Madison strutted in like she'd been cast as successful businesswoman in a commercial. She wore a tailored suit, heels sharp enough to be considered weapons, and an expression so self-satisfied she could have bottled it and sold it as a perfume called entitlement. "Well," she said, dropping into a chair across from me. "Isn't this cozy?" I didn't bother responding. Gregory Hunt entered last, carrying a thick folder, the kind of folder that holds decisions no one can bargain with. He greeted everyone with professional politeness, sat down, and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you for coming," he began. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Colonel Robert Lawson." My mother's shoulders stiffened. Madison leaned forward like she was about to receive an award. I just kept my hands steady on the table. Hunt opened the folder. "Colonel Lawson prepared this will 8 months before his passing," he said. He requested that it be read verbatim and exactly as written. He cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Robert James Lawson, being of sound mind, declare this to be my final will and testament. I wish to address my daughters, Hannah and Madison, directly." Madison's smile widened, as if she expected a monologue praising her existence. "To my daughter, Hannah Lawson," Hunt continued, "I leave 70% of my estate, including my primary residence, investment accounts, and my ownership stake in Lawson Manufacturing Group." The room didn't breathe. Madison's smile cracked so fast it was almost audible. Hunt kept reading. I do this with full acknowledgement that Hannah is not my biological child. I learned this truth when she was 2 years old. Despite that, or perhaps because of it, I chose to raise her, to love her, and to entrust her with the legacy I built. She has shown integrity, discipline, and loyalty qualities I value above blood. My mother quietly gasped. Madison recoiled like she'd been slapped. The words settled into the room, not loud, not sharp, just undeniable. Madison, of course, couldn't let the silence sit. This is absurd, she snapped. He was manipulated. He didn't know what he was signing. She jabbed a finger toward me. She pressured him. Hunt didn't flinch. There's no indication of manipulation. In fact, Colonel Lawson anticipated that the will might be contested. He left instructions for the inclusion of additional documentation. He lifted another folder thicker, heavier, and slid it onto the table. This includes records from a private investigator hired by the colonel to document concerning financial and legal behavior prior to his passing. Madison blinked. Private investigator? Newman, sitting quietly in the corner, stood and laid out the evidence like he was presenting exhibits in a trial. The first document, a bank statement showing the $60,000 withdrawn during my father's hospice care. The second, the emails to 3 different estate attorneys. The third, a transcript from the conversation where Madison said she wanted to make sure the right person gets what they deserve. The fourth, a receipt for the DNA test kit, ordered weeks before my birthday. And then Newman handed Hunt a final paper. Hunt read it slowly. This is a note from your father, addressed to both of you. It states, I know the truth about Hannah's parentage. I have known for decades. I chose her as my daughter, and I stand by that decision. I am aware of attempts to influence my decisions regarding my estate. These attempts have been documented. Not. Madison's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. She isn't even his. Hannah is the beneficiary. Hunt cut in, voice calm but firm. This is final. I should also add that a no contest clause was included. Any challenge to this will without substantial cause will result in forfeiture of the challenger's inheritance. Mom's eyes widened with panic. Madison's face drained of color, realization hitting her like impact damage. No, she whispered. No, you can't. He wouldn't. But he did. And he did it in writing. My mother finally looked at me then, torn between guilt and something that looked dangerously like relief. Madison, on the other hand, stood frozen, trying to calculate how she had gone from running the board to flipping it over in front of an audience. Hunt continued with the remaining legal formalities, but most of the oxygen had already been pulled out of the room. The will wasn't a story anyone could spin. It wasn't open to interpretation. It was a final decision from a man who had watched his family longer and more closely than anyone realized. I sat there with my hands still, my breathing steady, not triumphant, not angry, just grounded in something I hadn't felt since the entire mess began clarity. The truth had edges, but they were clean ones. And while Madison tried to gather her composure, I stayed exactly where I was, because there was nothing left to guess. The legal reading continued without pause, each word settling into place like a door clicking shut. Madison didn't sit back down right away. She hovered behind her chair like she was waiting for someone to tell her this was a staged prank and the cameras would come out if she just held still long enough. Hunt kept reading through the remaining legal points, his tone steady, unaffected by the meltdown gathering across the table. He shifted to the section detailing outstanding debts. There are records of financial advances made to Madison Lawson. These were categorized as loans to be deducted from her share of the estate. How much? Madison snapped. Hunt consulted a page. $200,000. That's not possible, she said, even though the disbelief in her voice sounded exactly like someone who knew it was possible and hoped it wouldn't be spoken aloud. Your father kept detailed ledgers, Hunt said, turning another page. These were signed by you. Madison lunged forward, grabbing the folder and flipping through the documents like she could tear out reality by pulling enough pages. These were gifts, she argued. He said I deserved them. Even gifts become advances when designated that way by the grantor, Hunt replied calmly. I watched her shoulders tighten, the panic spreading under her skin. She had walked in expecting a victory lap. Instead, she was discovering that my father saw every move she made long before she thought to hide it. She slammed the folder shut. "Then I'm contesting the will. That clause can't stop me." "It can," Hunt said. "And it will." Vanessa folded her hands neatly on the table. "A no-contest clause in California is enforceable as long as the document is clear and the circumstances are documented. Your father did both. Any contest without probable cause forfeits everything that would have been yours." Madison's voice cracked. "She's not his daughter. That point is acknowledged in the will," Vanessa said, "and dismissed by the testator himself." Madison stared at me then, eyes sharp, trying to calculate a new angle. For years, she controlled the narrative through volume, manipulation, and our mother's unwillingness to stand up to her. But here, in this polished conference room, with legal documents spread across the table, she didn't have an audience willing to twist themselves into knots on her behalf. She had facts. She grabbed her purse. "I need my lawyer." Hunt didn't blink. "Your attorney is welcome to review the documents. They will find the same content." The door opened before she could storm out, and her attorney, one she must have acquired recently, stepped inside. He looked confident for about 3 seconds before Hunt introduced the no-contest clause and slid the stack of evidence across the table. The attorney skimmed the first few pages, his expression flattening. Then he leaned toward Madison and whispered something sharp enough that she flinched. "What do you mean I can't win?" she hissed. He lowered his voice again, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't going the way she wanted, and even her hired help wasn't willing to pretend otherwise. Finally, he straightened up. "Miss Lawson, based on what I see here, contesting this will would be ill-advised." "Meaning?" Madison demanded. "Meaning you would lose, and your financial obligations would remain." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was the first time that had ever happened in her adult life. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, eyes glistening. Not because she disagreed. Not because she was angry. Because she finally understood that the secret she'd guarded for decades, the one she'd allowed Madison to weaponize, was collapsing in real time. Madison turned to me, and for a brief second, there was no anger, just shock. Shock that she wasn't the smartest person in the room. Shock that the story she'd curated so carefully was being read aloud in a version she didn't control. "You did this," she said softly, almost a whisper. "No," I said. "You did." The attorney closed the folder and stepped away from the table. "I think it's best if we leave." He intended for Madison to follow him. She didn't move. The room fell silent, the kind of silence you feel more than hear. Hunt resumed. "We have one final note from Colonel Lawson regarding the no-contest clause." He unfolded a small, handwritten page, the ink slightly faded. "If you attempt to undermine this will," he read, "the actions you take will speak louder than any legacy I could leave. I raised you both. I know your character. The consequences are the ones you choose." Madison's composure broke. Her breath hitched, then steadied again, but her grip tightened on the back of the chair until her knuckles went white. "Is that everything?" she asked, her voice raw. "For now," Hunt said. She gathered her purse like she was gathering broken pieces of herself, then walked toward the door with stiff, unsteady steps. Her attorney followed, holding the folder like it was radioactive. When the door closed, my mother let out a trembling breath. She looked at me, guilt all over her face. "Hannah." She said my name like she didn't know what language to use next. I didn't respond. Standing in the same room as my mother had become its own kind of emotional minefield. And unlike my military training, this terrain didn't come with a map. Hunt began stacking the documents, signaling the formal part of the process was over. Vanessa waited until the last page was placed into the folder before she leaned toward me. "We'll monitor for any attempt to file a challenge," she said. But based on her attorney's reaction, he'll talk her out of it. "She won't let it go," I said. "She won't be able to do anything with it, either." We left the conference room together, the hallway quiet, except for the muffled hum of office machines. My steps felt steady, grounded in a reality that wasn't pleasant but was at least honest. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up without permission. Vanessa paused beside me. Everything your father put in that will, she said. He meant. He wasn't confused. He wasn't manipulated. He made decisions from clarity, not guilt. I nodded. You're not responsible for the consequences of someone else's manipulation, she continued. Your sister backed herself into a corner. She always thought she could talk her way out of anything. Today she learned otherwise. I accepted. Cars passed on the street as we stood there, but the noise felt distant. My father had documented everything: Madison's theft, her attempts to restructure the will, her planning, her pressure, her leverage. He hadn't confronted her directly. He'd done something far more deliberate, left the truth to speak after he was gone. And for the first time since my birthday dinner, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the absence of doubt. The ground wasn't shaking anymore. It was solid, the kind of solid that doesn't come from winning, the kind that comes from truth being placed exactly where it belongs, unmovable and clear. Leaving Hunt's office didn't feel like the end of anything. It felt more like a sudden drop in noise after hours of drilling, quiet, but not peaceful. My mother walked beside me through the lobby with slow, unsure steps, like she was learning how to move through the world again. She opened her mouth twice as if she wanted to speak but couldn't settle on the right apology, excuse, or explanation. I didn't offer her any help. Outside, she finally found the words. Hannah, please come by the house. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to go home, close the door, and put an ocean between myself and whatever my mother thought she needed to confess. But avoiding hard conversations was exactly how my family ended up here, buried under decades of deceit until the truth had to claw its way out through a will reading. So I nodded, and we drove separately. The house looked the same as it always had. Tidy lawn, fresh paint, wind chimes that never stopped ringing. But stepping inside felt different. The air carried a tension that made my shoulders lift without permission. My mother stood in the middle of the living room like someone waiting for a verdict. She gestured toward the couch. Sit, please. I didn't sit. Just say what you need to say. She clasped her hands and stared at them. You asked if your father knew the truth about you. Yes, he did. For most of your life. The words didn't hit like a blow, they landed like confirmation of something my gut already knew. I met Ethan before your father and I reconciled, she continued. It was brief. I didn't think it would matter once Robert and I decided to rebuild our marriage. Except it did matter, I said. It always mattered. You just never told me. She nodded weakly. I was ashamed. And afraid. Your father insisted we move forward without involving Ethan. It seemed simpler, clean. Robert wanted a stable family, and he thought this was the way. Did Ethan know about me? I asked. She hesitated, which was all the answer I needed. Yes, she finally admitted. Your father told him after the paternity test. Ethan wanted to be involved, but Robert said it would confuse things. He said you needed one father, not two. So Ethan stepped back. I absorbed that quietly, trying to mesh the facts with the image of the man from the photograph. A stranger who looked at me with familiarity. Someone who apparently chose distance not because he didn't care, but because my parents thought disappearing him from the picture would magically make everything easier. Why did Madison know? I asked. My mother let out a tired exhale. She overheard an argument between me and Robert when she was 15. She confronted me. I begged her not to say anything. She enjoyed having something over me. I was afraid of what she'd do if I pushed back. So, Madison had been carrying this secret and weaponizing it for 2 decades, while I spent years believing she disliked me for the normal sisterly reasons: jealousy, petty rivalry, run-of-the-mill cruelty. Turns out she'd been sitting on a nuclear option the entire time. My mother walked to a cabinet and pulled out a wooden box. She held it as if it might burn her. This came from Ethan's attorney a few days after the funeral, she said. I wasn't sure when I should give it to you. She handed it to me, then stepped back. The box was smooth, dark wood, simple in design. I lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of documents and a smaller envelope with my name written in handwriting. I didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar anyway. Under that was a watch silver case, leather strap, worn from years of use. The kind of watch someone wears every day, not because it's valuable, but because it means something. My mother watched me, eyes glossy. He followed your life from a distance. He kept his promise to your father, but he always asked about you through his attorney. Birthdays. School. When you joined the army. When you were promoted. I ran my fingers along the watch face. It was cold from being stored away, but it felt solid, real, tangible in a way stories and explanations weren't. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Hannah, I made a promise I believed was the right thing at the time. But distance does not erase care. I watched you grow into someone strong, someone courageous, someone I would have been proud to raise if circumstances were different. I respected your father's place in your life, but I never stopped thinking of you as mine. This watch counted every hour I spent wishing I could be there. You owe me nothing. But I hope you'll keep it, Ethan. My throat tightened. There were no dramatic tears, no collapse, just a steady ache stretching across my chest. The kind that comes from understanding something late, too late to change it, but just in time to make sense of a lifetime of tension. Behind the letter were financial papers, trust documents. Ethan had created a trust in my name years ago, with activation conditions tied to legal acknowledgement of my parentage or a verified disclosure from the Lawson side. With the will reading, the condition had been met, a trust formed by the man who couldn't be my father, but chose to protect me anyway, long after he'd been erased from the picture. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. My mother's voice cracked, because I didn't know how to face what I'd done, and Madison kept reminding me she knew. Every time she wanted something, she reminded me. So that was the missing piece. My mother wasn't controlled by love, she was controlled by fear of exposure. Madison, armed with one truth, rearranged our family dynamic like a chessboard she thought only she was allowed to play on. I set the watch back in the box gently and closed it. Thank you, I said, not because everything was forgiven, but because the truth, even messy, delayed, and inconvenient, was still better than living with a question mark. My mother nodded, wiping her eyes. She didn't look relieved, just emptied of everything she'd been holding. I stayed only a few more minutes, long enough for her to say the words she needed to say, even if the timing was years too late. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different, not lighter, not heavier, just clearer. In the car, I rested the wooden box on the passenger seat. The watch inside felt like the missing thread that connected everything: my father's choice, my mother's silence, Madison's resentment, the way I always felt slightly off-center in my own family. It wasn't proof that I belonged or didn't belong. It was confirmation of something simpler. I wasn't a mistake. I was the product of flawed people making flawed choices, and two men, one biological, one not, still chose to claim me in the ways they could. The truth didn't fix everything inside me. It didn't erase the betrayal or soften the years I spent wondering why I never fully fit, but it gave shape to questions I'd carried for decades. As I started the car, I glanced at the box again, the edges catching a bit of sunlight. A man I'd never met had watched my life and cared about me in his own quiet, exiled way. A father who raised me had protected my future even after he was gone. For the first time since this entire mess began, I felt grounded in something that wasn't anger or confusion or duty. It was recognition. And recognition, unlike forgiveness, didn't require anyone else's permission. Driving home with the wooden box beside me felt strangely steady, like the ground had finally stopped shifting under my feet. I'd spent weeks moving through a fog of half-truths, family landmines, and military scrutiny. Yet sitting at a red light with Ethan's watch in my lap brought a clarity that didn't need permission to exist. The truth was out. My father's intentions were set in writing. My sister's plans had collapsed under the weight of evidence she created herself. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't dodging anything. I was deciding what came next. The first decision came the moment I walked into my apartment and found Vanessa's email waiting. She'd attached a summary of Madison's financial misconduct, the inheritance clause interpretations, and options for civil or criminal consequences. There was enough in the file to send Madison into a legal tailspin she wouldn't crawl out of easily. Theft from an incapacitated parent wasn't something the state of California treated like a parking ticket. I called Vanessa. "You've seen the documents," she said. We can move forward on several fronts. Restitution, charges, liens. I don't want to destroy her life, I said, surprising myself with how even the words sounded. But I'm not protecting her either. That's a reasonable position, she replied. What outcome feels proportional to you? Restitution, I said. Full repayment of the $60,000 she took while Dad was in hospice. And she covers her own legal fees. No negotiation. And if she refuses, then she deals with the DA. Vanessa exhaled in a way that sounded almost like approval. I'll draft the formal notice. She has 1 year to repay. Missing the deadline triggers criminal referral. The law doesn't punish emotional cruelty, but it does punish financial theft. And Madison, for all her scheming, never understood the difference between social consequences and legal ones. She thought the world operated the way our family did, where her tantrums rewrote the rules. She was about to learn the rules stayed exactly where they'd always been. She was just usually loud enough to drown them out. That night, my phone buzzed with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably Madison, hiding behind friends' phones. I didn't pick up. People always think closure is a conversation. Sometimes it's a boundary. Over the next week, I focused on the parts of my life that didn't revolve around family disaster recovery. My promotion packet stayed active. My commanding officer congratulated me privately when the clearance review formally closed. My team welcomed me back into routines without treating me like a fragile object, which I appreciated more than I could say. Soldiers don't hover. They just show up. And that was enough. A few days later, I drove to the old Lawson house with movers to pack my father's belongings, the ones legally mine now, but spiritually his forever. I didn't want the furniture. I didn't want the antiques. What I wanted were the things that actually meant something. His medals, his field notebooks, the photo albums he kept in his study, labeled with years instead of events, because he was convinced chronological order was the only correct way to catalog a life. My mother stayed mostly quiet as she watched the boxes being filled. We weren't hostile. We weren't warm either. Just two people who finally understood each other without liking what we understood. You deserved better, she said suddenly. The words hit the air like something fragile. Not an apology, more like an acknowledgement she should have made years earlier. I deserved honesty, I said. The rest is secondary. She nodded. And for once, she didn't try to fix anything. She didn't ask me to forgive her or bridge the gap. She just stood there with the realization that some distances don't close, no matter how badly you want them to. Later that evening, I received a long, frantic email from Madison. The subject line read, "We can work this out." The body was a mix of accusations, self-pity, and financial panic. She blamed stress, grief, the pressure of being the perfect daughter, the weather, anything except herself. She never mentioned the threat to my career, the anonymous report, the DNA test she weaponized, or the years she spent using our mother's guilt as currency. I didn't reply. You can't negotiate with someone who's incapable of recognizing a consequence as something they created. I forwarded the email to Vanessa for documentation, then archived it. My new life settled in quietly. The estate transfer finalized. The trust from Ethan activated without issue. My father's house sold quicker than expected, and the proceeds went exactly where his will directed them. I stayed out of the closing meeting and let professionals handle it. That house had too many shadows and not enough light. With the inheritance and trust merged, I had more financial mobility than I'd ever imagined. Not lavish wealth, but stability. Options. The freedom to choose my life, instead of reacting to the pieces someone else handed me. I bought a small cottage on the edge of town. Nothing extravagant: white siding, a wraparound porch, a little garden that hadn't been tended in years. It needed work, but it didn't need history erased the way the Lawson house did. I painted the walls myself because it felt good to change something without asking permission. I planted herbs even though I had no idea what I was doing. I set up a reading chair by the window. I hung my father's medals in my office and placed Ethan's watch on a small wooden stand beside them. Two men who shaped my life in completely different ways, both present in one quiet room. A few neighbors waved when I moved in. I waved back. No one asked personal questions. No one knew anything about my sister. It was bliss. After settling in, I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor to establish something I'd been thinking about since the truth came out. A foundation. Not a big one, not the kind with gala events and fancy dinners, just something functional, meaningful, and pointed at the exact kind of pain that shaped me. We called it the Marshall Lawson Foundation. Its mission statement was simple: support for children and young adults raised in unstable or emotionally abusive family environments, particularly those from military households. My story wasn't unique. Plenty of people grow up as the unloved child in a family full of secrets. If I could redirect even a fraction of what I inherited into helping someone else climb out of that kind of shadow, it felt like a good use of everything that had happened. One evening, after a long day of both military work and scrubbing years of grime out of my cottage's kitchen grout, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and the watch in my hand. The leather band had softened a little from being handled more often now. It wasn't flashy or expensive. It was steady, worn, and reliable. Much like the man who left it. I fastened it on my wrist and glanced at the time. The ticking was soft but certain. That was when it struck me not as a revelation, just as a quiet truth finally landing in its rightful place. Madison tried to use the truth to destroy me, but the truth was never on her side. It wasn't a weapon she could control. It belonged to the people who lived it, not the ones who twisted it. My life didn't unravel because of the DNA test. It unraveled because it was finally allowed to fall into the shape it always should have been. Justice didn't come from revenge or anger or dramatic confrontations. It came from clarity, boundaries, choices, and refusing to participate in the chaos someone else mistook for power. The watch ticked steadily against my wrist as the porch light flickered on, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, I felt the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything from me.